I'm Kelly, and this is Two Broads Talking Politics. I'm on today with Michael Holzman, author of the new book, Spies and Traitors, Kim Philby, James Angleton, and the Friendship and Betrayal that would shape MI6, the CIA, and the Cold War. Welcome, and can you start by just telling me a little bit about the book?
This is a book about two important figures in the Cold War. And I think it's important to begin by saying that the Cold War is over, and it's not necessary to pick sides anymore or to make villains out of some people and heroes for the other. We can just try to understand things. In this case, we're talking about counterintelligence. Secret intelligence is tasked with attempting to obtain the secrets of enemy nations, and sometimes nations that are not enemies, and preventing them from obtaining the nation's own secrets.
So you've written a few books about spycraft and about some of the same figures who show up in this book. Why did you decide in this one to focus on the relationship between Kim Philby and James Angleton?
It's an extension of the others. So much of the literature about secret intelligence is about cardboard figures that exist only insofar as they're doing secret things. And it seemed to me from the beginning of my interest in these that there is a need to talk about these people as if they're actually people. So my first book about Angleton is basically about his education and how the rest of his life related back to the education he had received at Yale. This book is about the relationships between these two men in a way probably the most important relationship in Angleton's life and what turned out to be a nearly fatal relationship in Philby's life. Kim Philby had gone into intelligence work as if it were the family business. His father was a very well-known British official in the Middle East named Philby. He had risen through the Indian civil service before the First World War, had become maybe the second most important person in the British government in Iraq during the First World War. And then he had received an assignment to go into Saudi Arabia, which wasn't Saudi Arabia then, it was Arabia, and make contact with Ibn Saud, who was one of the chieftains who was fighting for dominance there. Another British official, T.E. Lawrence, had also been assigned to go into Arabia and to make contact with a different chieftain, Hussein. So these two chieftains were fighting for dominance in Arabia, and as you can tell from the name, Ibn Saud won. And Philby became his advisor for decades after that, and was instrumental in creating Saudi Arabia. He became a very well-known explorer of the Arabian Peninsula. So he would go out on expeditions into the desert, and then go back to London, write a book, do lecture tours, and make connections with much of the British ruling class. His son then had a leg up on this. And he went, as the British ruling class did at that time, and still does. He went to what's called the public school, which is a private school, and then to Trinity College, Cambridge. He was a very good student. Picked up some languages, did work in history, and made some friends. And the friends he made started out on the left. We're talking about 1930 when there's a depression in Britain and much pressure. And this group eventually was picked up by the Soviet Secret Intelligence Service as likely people who would be useful to the Soviet Union. They were told that they could work for peace. This was between the two wars. That they could work for peace if they worked with the Soviet Communist Party and kept quiet about it. So Philby decided that he would camouflage himself as a fascist. He joined various fascist organizations in London, and then he got an assignment through his father with the Times of London to go to Spain, where he became a journalist covering the fascist side, covering Franco's side. And for a year or more, his articles in the Times were the way that British people learned about what was going on in the Spanish Civil War. When the war was over, he went back to England. He was assigned by the Times to go with the British Expeditionary Force in 1939 that went into France. He just missed being at Dunkirk, came back to England, and through some help with one of his college friends, Diverges, he joined the British Secret Intelligence Service, MI6. His career was rather dazzling. He was a very charming man and very upper class. And so he went rapidly up the ladder, and he became perhaps the most important counterintelligence person in the British Secret Intelligence Service. James Angleton was a few years younger. His father had a typical American success story. He had started out as a poor farmer in Indiana. He moved to Boise, Idaho. He got some retail jobs. He got a job with the National Cash Register before the First World War. And he was a terrific salesman. So by 1930, he was vice president of National Cash Register. He went on a tour of their branches in Europe. He came back to Ohio, the headquarters, and he said, "The Italian branch isn't doing very well. I'll buy it from you." So National Cash Register sold him the Italian business. He moved to Milan and raised his family in Italy. So James Angleton started school in Boise, and then he went to Dayton, and then when he was just before he was a teenager, he was in Milan, Italy, which was quite a change. And the family lived in a palace in Milan. When it was time for James Angleton to go to what we would call high school, he was sent to a public school in England, private school. And after he graduated from that, he went to Yale. At Yale, he became a very prominent student poet and publisher. He published a literary magazine that had famous English and American poets in it: E. E. Cummings, William Epson, Ezra Pound. He graduated from Yale with very poor grades, but a very good reputation. And at the beginning of the Second World War, he went to Harvard, studied law, not very much, and was picked up by the Army. His father, who was already in the early American Secret Intelligence Service, the OSS, got him into that. And James Angleton was sent to England to study counterintelligence, and his teacher was Kim Philby. He spent a year in London learning how to do counterintelligence from Kim Philby, and then was sent out to Italy, which he knew very well since he had grown up there, to head the counterintelligence efforts of the American Secret Intelligence Service, OSS, with constant reference back to London to Kim Philby. At the end of the war, James Angleton was a rapidly rising star in OSS, with particular strength in his Italian connections. He took over relationships liaison with the Italian military intelligence service, and given the power relations at the time, it was said that he ran the Italian military intelligence service. He was also the patron of what became the Mossad, the Israeli intelligence service. As things happened, when Angleton went to Washington after the end of the war, where he kind of checked in with the new CIA, Philby was assigned to Washington to be the British liaison for all their intelligence services to all the American intelligence services, because people thought he would be head of the British intelligence service. So there was a period then where where Philby and Angleton worked together and had lunch together, went to cocktail parties with one another, and so forth. In 1950, there was a crisis due to a break in encoded messages between the Soviet representatives in New York and Moscow during the Second World War. It was discovered that one of Philby's college friends, Donald McLean, was a Soviet agent. The Soviet Union found out that that McLean was about to be arrested somehow, and decided to get him out of there. So McLean and Diverges, who oddly enough was lodging in the basement of Philby's house in Washington, were taken to Moscow. And it was a big event, the missing British diplomats.
So how did Angleton react to this? Like, at what point did he start to think maybe Philby might be a double agent? Did he ever start to think that, what was the nature of their relationship?
Well, when Burgess and McLean went to Moscow, the head of the CIA said, it's obvious that Philby's also a spy. And he ordered the British intelligence service to get him out of Washington. And at that time, it was clear to Angleton, although he kind of fudged it, that Philby had been a spy. And then he and his colleagues, we're talking about 1950 here, he and his colleagues had to go back over everything that had happened that involved Philby from 1942, let's say, to 1950, and realize that all their secret operations have been betrayed to the Soviet Union. This was kind of difficult for people, and it was particularly difficult for Angleton psychologically, that his teacher had been betraying him all this time. One of his colleagues said that given everything that Philby had known, it would have been better for the American intelligence services to have done nothing than what they had done, which had been revealed to the KGB. But at this point, their careers diverge, as you could imagine. Mm-hmm. Philby went back to London and was interrogated over and over again and never confessed. And some of his friends in MI6 didn't believe that he was a spy, thought that he had been set up. Well, he was fired and then kind of drifted around for a while. And then his friends and some other people decided that his journalistic background was valuable. And in 1959, he was sent to Beirut as a foreign correspondent for two English periodicals, The Economist and The Observer. And for the next 3 or 4 years, pretty much everything that people living in England and people outside of England who read The Economist heard about what was going on in the Middle East. They heard from the articles that Philby was writing. Philby's father had retired to Beirut, having been given quite a bit of support from Ibn Saud and also a woman. In any case, he was in Beirut. So the two of them, St. John Philby and Kim Philby, were partners there at the end of St. John Philby's life. St. John Philby knew all the heads of state between Baghdad and Egypt, And so Kim Philby could call him up and say, "Hi, I'm Kim Philby. I'd like to interview you." "Oh, yeah, we know your father." And so he got all the inside information. He would type up a report for The Economist, and another one for The Observer, most probably also one for MI6 for his British friends, saying, "Here's the inside secret scoop from this." And then, if that was true, there would be a carbon copy to the KGB. Angleton kept rising in the CIA, and in 54, 55, he became head of counterintelligence of the CIA. He was very close to Alan Dulles and Richard Helms, the leaders of the CIA, and they let him do pretty much anything he wanted to do. One of the things he wanted to do was to set up a program to read all the international mail that came to and from the United States. And he did this, he set up this operation and it ran for a number of years in the late 1950s. And that also included telegrams. So if you sent a letter to your auntie in Antwerp, the CIA would have read it. They did a number of other such projects. Whenever the leadership of the CIA had a special project, secret project, that they didn't want anyone to know about, even other people in the CIA, they gave it to Angleton. Because of his connections with Mossad from the time it was founded, he had a particular interest in Israel, and that was sealed off in the rest of what the CIA was doing. It was just his job. In the late 1950s, he used to go to Israel on vacation. In the late 1950s, the Israelis said, we're surrounded by all these countries that have a lot more people than we do and bigger armies and everything. We need an atom bomb. Angleton happened to have turned, as it's called, a prominent atomic energy scientist. And he said to the fellow, "Look, you owe me. I want you to go to Israel and give them some advice." So the rumor is that the Israeli atomic bomb project was at least accelerated through the efforts of Angleton. At this time, another part of the CIA, the operations part, was trying to roll back the communist governments in Eastern Europe. The first one, in 1949, was Albania. And the Americans and the Brits got together and they trained a lot of Albanian refugees, exiles, and parachuted them into Albania to try to overthrow the Albanian communist government. They were all killed. A little later, the same rollback effort was made in Poland. And they found out that there was a secret underground army, anti-communist army in Poland that just needed some arms and money and they would throw out the Red Army. So the CIA sent in lots of arms and lots of money until finally they realized that there wasn't a secret army, that this was the Polish Secret Intelligence Service, and they were being bamboozled. Angleton thought about these things, and there are many other such adventures. And he decided that what was going on, this was after Philby had gone to Beirut, was that Philby was telling the Soviets about the secret plans of the CIA and MI6 and so forth. As each these operations failed, he'd say, "This is Kim's work." So he decided that he would catch Philby, and he sent various representatives to Beirut, and they used an interesting method. They started having big parties in Beirut, to which they made sure that Philby was invited. Philby was an alcoholic. Angleton was an alcoholic. Alan Dulles was an alcoholic. They were all alcoholics. So in any case, he liked to go to parties. So they got very close to catching Phil. MI6 sent Philby's best friend from the agency to Beirut and said, "Look, Kim, it's over. We know that you're a spy. Sign this confession." Philby said, "Sure, I'll do that in the morning." So if by coincidence there was a Soviet freighter in the harbor at Beirut, and in the morning Philby and the freighter were gone. Angleton's career continued to prosper. He got into a fight inside the CIA where he was head of counterintelligence. That meant that his job was to keep the KGB from doing it again, from infiltrating the CIA, from having a CIA official who appeared to be working for the CIA who was also working for the KGB. So he started instituting very severe, what was called positive vetting, checking people, finding out what their grandmother had done and this kind of thing. The people who were running the operations that were attempting to roll back the Soviet Union said, "Why are you making this fuss? You're preventing us from doing our jobs." And so there was this conflict between the operators and the counterintelligence people. And this is still going on. These people are still fighting this over. Was Angleton preventing the CIA from operating well, or was he keeping them from being infiltrated?
So when you're looking at these things, how do we know what we know and what we don't know when we're talking about espionage and counter-espionage? Like, are there sources that we can trust? Do you always go in this with a little bit of, well, maybe they're lying to us even in these sources?
Oh, I go into it thinking that everybody's lying. So you triangulate, Mm-hmm. Everybody's written books. Philby wrote a book. And everybody who ever met Philby has written a book. So you have all these, and sometimes you get information from them, and sometimes you don't. I once interviewed a CIA official, retired CIA official, who had worked with Angleton. And he said, he gave me some piece of information. And I went home and I checked it, and I came back. Next time I interviewed him, I said, that wasn't true. He said, "Oh, I was just trying to see how good you were." So there's that. A very interesting source of information is that when the committee that was investigating the Kennedy assassination was told by the courts that it had to release all its files, they did that as if they had backed up a dump truck to the CIA headquarters, filled it up, and then dumped it in the street in front of the Supreme Court. So there's all the stuff about the Kennedy assassination, but then there was all kinds of random things that the CIA had included in there, going back to the founding of the CIA, which I don't think they were aware they had done this. One can go through these 10,000 pages of documents. One thing that I found, which was a cold shower, was I found the contract that the CIA, the standard contract that the CIA would give to agents they had hired to do their work for them. And the contract looked like, any kind of employment contract. But at the end of it, it said, what is the name of the next of kin to whom we should give your death bonus to? I said, "Oh, that's the kind of operation that you have here."
Yeah.
When Angleton was dying, to put that into a framework, he died of lung cancer. And just the year or two before he died, he went off alcohol, which surprised all his friends. Anyway, as he was dying, literally dying, he was interviewed by a journalist. And he said, Angleton said, the CIA got tens of thousands of brave people killed. We played with lives as if we owned them. We gave false hope. I so misjudged what happened. Fundamentally, the founding fathers of U.S. intelligence were liars. The only thing they had in common was a desire for absolute power. I did things that I regret, but I was part of it and loved being in it. Alan Dulles, Richard Helms, Carmel Offey, and Frank Wiesner were the grand masters. If you were in a room with them, you were in a room full of people that you had to believe would deservedly end up in hell. Angleton slowly sipped his tea and then said, I guess I will see them there soon. Which is not to say that the KGB was a benevolent operation. Mm-hmm. It was that they were pretty much the same kind of people. But when Philby went to Russia in 61, 62, he went to work with the KGB. And they tried to draw him out, but that didn't work. In any case, they asked him to give them the names of everyone he had ever known in secret intelligence. So there are hundreds of British and American secret intelligence officials and agents who had to be moved out because the KGB had their names and descriptions. Mm. Eventually, when he published his book, he included an appendix that had all their names. So it was public knowledge. He gradually became the Soviets weren't quite sure about him. They gradually decided he must be okay. And they made him a teacher. So he would be given classes of young KGB agents to tell them how to be a spy in England. What you should wear, how you should talk, so forth. And he thought that was a good thing, and they thought that was a good thing. And he did that for the rest of his life. Angleton became the CIA official who was in charge of relations with the Kennedy Assassination Commission, the Warren Commission. Mm-hmm. His job was to say that the CIA didn't do it. So, of course, the CIA didn't do it. He said so. He did a lot of things like that.
What did that do to their psyche? And I guess maybe them all being alcoholics tells us something, but to sort of have to be constantly doubting what you're hearing and questioning everything, were they able to form close friendships and relationships? What did that look like for them?
Well, Philby had 4 wives, one after another, unlike his father, who had 2 wives all at the same time. He had 4 wives, and I think he was a sociopath. That he was very charming, and everybody thought that they were his best friends, and then they just weren't there anymore for him, as far as he was concerned. His alcoholism was very, very severe at the end. Angleton, I think, was much less damaged. Although he was paid to be suspicious. That was his job. And that was a problem. His marriage, he stayed married to the same person. That was kind of rocky. She would go home to her parents every once in a while. Mm. But she came back to him. I think it was very damaging. I think you're absolutely right about that. They could only talk to other people in the CIA.
So how can people get your book?
Well, I think it's Pegasus Books is publishing it, and Simon & Schuster is distributing it. And Pegasus has a wonderful publicist, so I think that the word is getting out. It'll be at major bookstores, and of course it's on Amazon.
Is there anything else that you want to make sure that we talk about today?
I'd like to go back to what I said at the beginning. The Cold War is over. What we do as we consider what happened has to be done in some way where we try to push aside 50 years of propaganda and work out what actually happened and who actually did what, and not play with these cardboard figures of black and white, good and evil. I think that's important.
Well, Michael, thank you so much for joining me today. I think anyone who enjoys mystery and spy stories, which is most of us, getting a sort of real life look into it is really interesting.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Two Broads Talking Politics, part of the Dimcast Podcast Network. Our theme song is called Are You Listening? Off of the album Elephant Shaped Trees by the band Immunuri, and we're using it with permission of the band. Our logo and other original artwork is by Matthew Weflin and was created for use by this podcast. You can contact us at twobroadstalkingpolitics@gmail.com or on Twitter or Facebook at twobroadstalk. You can find all of our episodes at twobroadstalkingpolitics.com or anywhere podcasts are found.